Okay, let's talk about Dune, Part 1, directed by Denis Villeneuve. Where do I start with a film like Dune Part 1? Well, in the beginning, there was Frank Herbert. Is it Frank Herbert or Brian Herbert? I think Brian Herbert's his son. Frank Herbert wrote the novel, yeah. So I was trying to be nice and poetic there with the in the beginning thing, and I kind of forgot the author's name. Frank Herbert, I'm pretty sure. And Dune came out as a book in the 60s at some point. You can tell how great the research is in this video. I'm mainly here to talk about the 2021 film, but we have the original novel, and that was adapted into the David Lynch film in 1984, I think, which was a notable disaster in a number of ways. And I've referred to the film in the past few years since I revisited it, I think in 2019, as a beautiful mess. There's a lot to admire visually in David Lynch's Dune. Some incredible stuff like miniatures and models and matte paintings and sets, costumes, world building. But all that plot into that one movie is a little bit tough to swallow, and by the time you get to the third act, it's like, I don't know what the fuck's going on, but it's fun. Like, the music's rocking, it's explosions are kicking off. We got sandworms flying all over the place. Let's just let it happen. Just let it happen. It's got a good cast. Let's just let it happen. But now the kind of rumblings of this remake coming, or kind of a new adaptation of the book by Denis Villeneuve, was like, holy shit, because this is a guy who is in 2 films now proven himself to be a phenomenal science fiction director with the film Arrival and Blade Runner 2049. And specifically with Blade Runner 2049, he showed that he could make a follow-up to something that was so loved and remain faithful to that original piece, while also doing his own thing with it and branching off into somewhere different. But that somewhere different feels like it always fit there, but to begin with. That's the way I feel about it. And so the prospect of him, being faithful to the book Dune, but also doing it in his own style, which kind of fits with the book, is something that I think or hoped would be the case. Not that I've ever read the book, and fair play to everyone who has been reading the book this year. I know a lot of people I follow on Twitter and stuff have been reading the book in anticipation and stuff, and maybe I'll get around to it one day, but I'm not as in love with the world. And it's kind of a special film to me, the 84 version, because it's one of my dad's favorites. My stepdad was the guy who introduced me to Star Wars, and that's how that lifelong love for me came from my stepdad. But my dad was he was more of a Dune guy than Star Wars, and he got me the video when I was maybe 10 or 11 or something like that. And I remember it had a horizontal VHS cover, and he's like, this is a fucking science fiction film. And he loved it. And I was just like, oh, wow, that's disgusting. That is, it's weird. Oh my God, his chest just exploded. Like, what? So I was just almost a bit confused and stuff. I remember I revisited it when I was 15 or something. I watched the video again and was just like, wow, this is a weird film, this is. And I got the Blu-ray once I was a David Lynch fan, and kind of saw it with different eyes and appreciated it a lot more. And I have the new 4K release. I haven't watched it yet, but I had to kind of get that kind of nice package, and I'm looking forward to revisiting it maybe soon, now that I've seen this new version. So I wanted to not just review the 2021 Dune, but just give you my story of watching it and how I felt about it and what I think of the film. So when the cast was announced for this, I was like, Jesus Christ, they're going all out with this. It's like Timothée Chalamet and Oscar Isaac, Javier Bardem, Rebecca Ferguson, Dave Bautista, Stellan Skarsgård. I think it is Stellan, right? There's so many in that family, but he's kind of the Don of the Skarsgård family, the godfather of the Skarsgård family. But Zendaya, I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that. It's just Jason Momoa, of Josh Brolin. It's calm down with the cast, but one of this film's great strengths is the cast. It's incredible. It's a great cast, and even beyond that, you got even smaller kind of characters played by really, really good actors and stuff. So the casting is off the charts. Now, there's a great cast in the 84 version. I'm not going to try and compare the films or anything too much, but Dune 1984, David Lynch, has a great cast, but it doesn't really have great acting. Yeah, he didn't quite harness that out of them. And it was just kind of a weird, almost, I don't know, circumstantial thing. You know, Kyle MacLachlan this was his first movie, you know. But, you know, it's just one of those things. But whereas Dune 2021, or Dune Part 1, has a great cast and great acting. The acting is phenomenal in this film. Now, before I get to the film, very briefly, it is me, so very briefly could be anywhere between 1 and 25 minutes. I knew I wanted to go see this in the cinema. I wanted to see it in the IMAX because it had been, you know, there were IMAX sequences, so you would see the screen kind of adjust the aspect ratio and stuff. So I wanted to see the fullest image I could for this film as a big screen movie. First trailer came out, and I was like, "This looks incredible!" And it was the Pink Floyd trailer. I only recently found out that it's actually like a Hans Zimmer rearrangement of Pink Floyd's Eclipse from Dark Side of the Moon, which it's a really like underrated song because it doesn't really serve a very good purpose as a song in its own right. It's best listened to as the capper to Dark Side of the Moon. You know, it's kind of the winding down and the big crescendo as opposed to a really great standalone track. But this rendition of that song, you know, with the Dune trailer was just incredible. And I just couldn't wait to see this film. And then obviously there was the pandemic, it was delayed and stuff. And every subsequent trailer they put out, I've just been like, like you kind of, you blew your load on that Pink Floyd trailer. The peak has been set and you're not getting anywhere near it again. Just forget about it. Like, I'm not interested. Like, that trailer was incredible. And they just, you know, every subsequent one was just, I would just turn it off after a minute because it just wasn't doing anything for me. I mean, it looked good, but like, it just didn't have that same oomph, you know, that same impact. So I really wanted to see it in the IMAX. So me and Connie, we went down, and she was like livid because she didn't realize that an IMAX ticket would cost £12.50. And she was like, "This is ridiculous." She was flying off the handle about this, and then she was like, "Oh, well, maybe it's £12.50 for both of them." I'm like, "Nope, it's £12.50 each." And she just, you know, no, that's just, so fine, I'll pay for it. I paid for both tickets, 25 quid. There you go. It's just wipe your mind of it. Let's just go watch this film. But she still couldn't let it go. She was so angry about this £12.50. And I have to say, when I left the cinema, I thought that was more than worth £12.50. You know, I mean, I'm assuming we're going to be able to buy this in a hopefully a really nice 4K Blu-ray transfer, and fingers crossed with the IMAX sequences intact, for about £20, you know. So it's more than half of what I'll pay to own it forever, potentially. But, you know, that IMAX experience. And I think the only time I don't think, I'm trying to think. I went to see The Last Jedi in the IMAX. I can't think of any other time. Maybe The Force Awakens. Possibly Avatar when that came out, but I can't remember. But the Dark Knight Rises, I definitely went to see on IMAX, and that was incredible. But it was needed for me, a film like this that just looked so visual and so, because, you know, a lot of the films that came out when I was in Norway, and there was no IMAX in Norway, so it was just, let's just go to the cinema, whatever screen it is whatever screen it is. Here we have the option to go to the IMAX. So it was like, this extra step needs to be taken, and this extra amount of money needs to be exchanged to see this film in this format. And as we were walking in, I just wanted to mention this. There was a couple of young girls, and well, maybe in their 20s or whatever. And one of them was like, "So what does it mean when it's on IMAX then? Has it been shot with special cameras or something?" And the girl goes, "I think it's just comfier seats." So we get in, and the seats are really comfy, but the armrests were like solid plastic, and I was like, "Bloody hell, you think we get a bit of a nice cushiony armrest for £12.50?" And then that made Connie immediately jump to the story when we went to see Captain America: The Winter Soldier in New York in an AMC theater, and it was like regular movie price, but it was like reclining luxury like sofas, which was just the weirdest thing in the world. But anyway, so Dune IMAX. About 20 minutes into the film, I felt like leaning over to Connie and saying, "This is unbelievable." But I didn't want to break the mood. I didn't say anything. I was just so locked in on this, what I was seeing. You know, this massive screen, the sound was just like rattling the seats at times. It felt like you could at least feel the thrum of it in the floor. And it was just, oh my God. And I was just loving the audio and visual experience of it all. And then Connie finally leaned over to me about an hour or so into the film, and I thought, oh, she's going to say that she's loving this. And she just goes, "He looks really weird without a beard." referring to Jason Momoa's character of Duncan Idaho, whose beard gets progressively shorter throughout the film. But I was like, oh, well, that that's the one thing Connie had to say about it. Now, to be fair, Connie loved this film. She absolutely loved it. But yeah, I mean, it was just a big screen experience that I will hopefully not forget in a hurry. But it was, man, just the story almost didn't even need to be that good because it was just such a great spectacle. The way that this thing looked was nuts. Like the design of it, the kind of the craftsmanship that went into the designing of the ships, of the outfits, of the locations, you know, of the... I'm not going to go into the story of Dune and do all that kind of housekeeping. You kind of... If you're watching this, listening to me talk about it, you've probably seen the film and you get a grasp of... You know, that's the thing. Some people were not too clear on the story of Dune and were wondering, like, do I need to read the books before seeing this film? But I think... Having seen the Lynch version, I had a bit more of an even footing on the story than maybe Connie, for instance. But I think the film does a really good job of not being like a massive exposition salad and kind of just constantly driving in this information. You love the way that the Lynch version opens with Virginia Madsen just on like a star field, just saying, okay, buckle up, here's all the information. I think they had a glossary of terms that they would hand out in the cinemas when Dune came out in the 80s. But you didn't really need that here. The only criticism I have of the film, which will fade away with repeat viewings because I'll watch it with subtitles, some of the dialogue was a little bit incomprehensible to me in the really intense moments, and the sound design is so full in the film that sometimes that dialogue gets lost a little bit. But once I get the subtitles, I'll be able to kind of decipher that. And it was one of those things with like Cloud Atlas where I didn't understand what the fuck some of them were talking about with this weird future speak, but I got the gist of it and I kind of enjoyed that. So I didn't really feel like I lost any information, but there's certainly lines of dialogue I didn't decipher that I would like to know what they were. So with repeat viewings at home with subtitles, but it almost feels a shame to ever watch it again at home, you know. And I hope that when the sequel comes out, and it was great that they announced that like the week of its release, I think, or just before, it's great that that's happening, and I hope that they re-release part 1 in IMAX. I'd love to do maybe a double header, maybe not considering the length of it. But then again, I did the Star Wars sequel trilogy, so that was like 6+ hours, 7 hours of Star Wars, so that was fine. So maybe a Dune doubleheader would be nice. Yeah, it's the visual execution of everything, and one of the things that I found interesting before the film came out was all the reviews are coming in, and there was a lot of chatter. There was a lot of holy shit masterpiece. There was a lot of it's really overwrought, and you know it's really dense, and you know and boring and dull, and it looks nice, but it's just so drab, and like the story isn't anything, and all this stuff. And there's also other criticism that probably have a lot more validity in my mind in terms of the culture that has been appropriated in this film, which apparently is part of the original book as well. So there's definitely something to be said for that. But for me, it's not something that I'm very knowledgeable about, and I was just viewing it purely on taking it at face value. And the word overwhelming springs to mind. There's a sequence near the beginning where Oscar Isaac, Duke Atreides, he's I'm not sure if Duke is his title, right? Let's not get into the semantics of the finer points of Dune that I'm not all that knowledgeable on. But Duke Atreides, Oscar Isaac, who was brilliant in the film, by the way. That little speech he had with his son Paul about whatever you decide to do in life, you'll still be the only thing I ever needed you to be, and that's my son. That's and it delivered perfectly. I think this is one of my favorite Oscar Isaac performances. Like it's kind of subtle, but it's like really a complete performance. Like I just really completely bought everything about his character, and he did a great job. I mean, if we get into the actors, I think Timothée Chalamet was phenomenal. And I can see people getting a little bit maybe wary of kind of the pretty boy who's now the kind of the it kid, and he's not a teenager anymore, but he's been in a lot of films, and it's been a very densely saturated period of Timothée Chalamet kind of leading roles or starring roles in movies. But I think he's great, and he really suits the character. And I don't know, there's just a lot of really nice intricacies to his performance in terms of I don't say paranoia, but the mental struggles he's going through with these visions that are kind of really haunting him. And just the burden of knowing that he might have to really step up to a huge journey and task ahead of him. And I think that he does a great kind of restrained performance. Like, he really conveys how much this guy is bottling himself in. And there's an incredible scene where he's started to cotton on to the fact that his mother, Rebecca Ferguson, has been training him in the ways of the Bene Gesserit, and kind of using his mind and kind of like telepathy and other kind of uses of the mind and stuff like that, telekinesis perhaps, I don't know how you categorize it. And he's beginning to realize that she's been not just teaching him something that she is kind of proficient at, but she's been teaching him this stuff for a purpose, and that it's this grander kind of plan. And he feels slighted by that. And it's, there's some people who are visiting and they leave, and it's just the mother and the son, and they're just conversing back and forth. It's kind of like it's misty. Their hair is kind of wet and damp, and it's kind of a very dour kind of visual setting for this conversation. And they're kind of going back and forth, and they're talking about this, and it's in like a medium close-up of both of them back and forth. And then we get in closer as the conversation gets a bit more kind of, is this what you've been doing? Is kind of, teaching me this stuff for a grander purpose and stuff that I didn't know about. And then we cut back and we see that they're standing about 20 feet away from each other. And it's just this like over the shoulder shot of Rebecca Ferguson. Then we have Timothée Chalamet standing way off, and there's just this like gulf between them, and he's kind of almost faded into the mist. And then we reverse and see the same kind of perspective of her. And it was just a great way of showing visually like this distance between them, but yet this very intimate conversation where you could say that like a lot of films kind of make this mistake where characters are having conversations where they clearly wouldn't hear themselves speaking at such a low volume, but these are two characters who can communicate with their minds a lot, and so maybe they're amplifying it. But it's just the visual setup of that was, and it's those little details that Dune is filled with that I really, really enjoyed. And to get back to my original track, the visual execution of this world. Christopher Nolan, in the run-up to this, was talking about how he'd seen it and he loved it, and he thought that it was one of the best marriages of practical effects and CGI that he'd ever seen. Like, it was one of those things where digital effects were used so well in this film that it just blends in to the point where almost anything could conceivably be a model or something. And someone on Twitter had posted a shot of Dave Bautista looking out onto like the kind of the desert of Arrakis, and there's like these massive, like almost city-sized ships as far as the eye can see. And this person on Twitter was like, "Wow, it's like you just can't tell if it's real or not. Like the CGI is so good, I can't even tell if it's fake." And it's like, well, of course it's fake. They're not going to build that for real. Like, your brain just inherently knows that something of a certain scale would never be done for real. It's possible, but no one would ever finance that. It'd be, if you're going to do stuff like that and make everything for real, in a movie like Dune, it'd be like a $5 billion budget. But that just made me chuckle. But I have to agree that, if you take that out of the equation, your brain kind of knowing that, well, that's obviously not real. There were moments where I thought maybe that whole city on Arrakis was a model. I don't think it was. I don't think that they may have. I don't know. I'd love to see the behind the scenes, but it does feel like Denis films don't really get like proper meaty behind the scenes content, which is a shame. But I'd love to know all the ins and outs of the way that they achieved this film in terms of the design of everything, the art direction, the production design. Really, it just feels tactile and real. Even stuff like Paul's bedroom on Arrakis. There's this huge kind of bronze kind of mural, and it looked real to me. I'm almost 100% sure that was a real thing and a huge set. And you just feel those things, you feel those details, and so when you do get to the more outlandish stuff and these huge sandworms, it doesn't throw you as much because everything else feels so grounded and real. They went to a real desert to film. They could have very easily done that on a soundstage or with the technology that they use now in with Lucasfilm and ILM, where with the Mandalorian, where they just have like a 360-degree screen, and it looks incredible. It almost looks like the real thing, and it's a lot better than blue screen or green screen. They could have done that with Dune, and I'm sure it would have looked great, but they went to a real desert and got a lot of that footage for real. And so that just, it all builds up, you know. It's like you have a jar of like, you know, practical stuff, and the more you fill the jar, like, I don't know, I'm going with this analogy, it's a really shitty analogy, but, you know, it's, it just feels like the more practical stuff you throw in there, the more it kind of completes the illusion. Which, you know, every film is an illusion in some sense, and Dune is a big one. It's a huge world, and just some of the ships just looked. The design of them I loved, you know, and again some real great location stuff, but the story really resonated with me as well, and it was a really impactful story where I was really tuned into the Paul Atreides story in a way that I really wasn't in David Lynch's version, you know. And even watching it a few years ago, now that I'm a fan of David Lynch, now that I'm a fan of Kyle MacLachlan, it still didn't register with me as much as I'd like. And, you know, not to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen the Lynch version or anything and doesn't know what happens next in the story, if you've seen Dune Part 1, you know, I can say without spoiling anything that everything you see in this 2.5 hour Denis Villeneuve version is probably done in about 45 minutes to an hour in David Lynch's version, which just shows you how much everything has been compacted. So the idea to do this as a 2-part film is much welcomed. Perhaps a bit of a gamble to just make the first part and not know whether you're going to get to make the second one. It seems like everyone involved really wanted the second one to happen, so it's a good thing that it's going to kind of go ahead, especially with the controversy of what Warner Brothers did with 2021 and making everything go straight to streaming at the same time as going to the cinema, and that was kind of a bit of a sore point for people involved with the film. I think that they weren't very happy, especially the director himself. And, you know, I'm going all over the place, but, you know, Denis has been making some interesting statements on social media, and not social media, he's been making interesting statements in interviews, which then gets kind of written up and talked about in headline form on social media, and talking about how like all the Marvel movies are just copy and paste movies and stuff. And, you know, you do get these directors who are just such pretentious dickheads sometimes, and then you get like Paul Thomas Anderson, who's just like, yeah, I liked Venom too, you know, like, yeah, it's just one of those weird things where I think people get too wrapped up in that and kind of they get offended by that. I mean, he has every right in the world to say things like that, but I do enjoy his kind of dickish approach to Dune. And I know that some people get kind of riled up by the fact that Denis is like, you know, Dune must be seen in the cinema, and it's like, dude, there's a pandemic going on. But, you know, it's a part of the pandemic now where I think that I don't know, and I'm not one of those people who's just like, we just need to get on with things. I've never been in that frame of mind, but I do think if people are careful, you know, and you know, I've been to the cinema I think now 5 times since the pandemic. So I think February 2020, and then I want to say August 2021 I went to see, I think maybe July, we went to see A Quiet Place Part 2. Then I saw Shang-Chi, The French Dispatch, Dune, and Last Night in Soho. And every time I've made sure that I sit way apart from other people, you know. And I have a local cinema that I love going to, but it's like such a small room that I'm not comfortable going in there because it's just all very packed in. But, you know, I know people were wound up by that, but there is a lot of truth to what he says. This is a film that is designed for the big screen and is incredible on the big screen. And I was almost moved emotionally, not by the dramatic emotional parts of the film, but just by the sheer scale of it. This is a kind of film that doesn't come around very often. This is the kind of film that doesn't get the kind of, I want to say, funding to happen that often, but apparently, you know, this film was made for a lot less than something like Black Widow, and you start to wonder where all that money's going. Because this just looks like every dollar is on the screen. It's just immaculate. You know, the one minor niggle actually was the Baron Harkonnen character, Stellan Skarsgård. He looked great and disgusting in a way that wasn't like made me want to vomit like the Baron of the David Lynch version of Dune. But I love the design of him and how he was executed and how he was kept in the shadows and stuff. It's repulsive, like, oh, brilliant. But in one scene, it looked like they digitally like tried to alter his face because he's got these like fat jowls and he's in a fat suit and stuff. But they looked really smooth on the chin. And they pushed it a bit too far with the digital trickery on that one. So that's the only little flaw I would say visually, was that one sequence where he didn't look very good. There was just something smoothed out by his face, and it was very obvious. But apart from that, the film was pretty much spotless in terms of the visual execution of everything. And as I said, the performances were great. Zendaya, however you say it, her presence in the film is really felt, even though she's in the film for about probably 6 or 7 minutes, if even that. And that I love that kind of ties in with, because there's something about like the way that they shot her in the desert. Just there's kind of this allure to her, and the way that she's shot. I mean, it goes back to like the classic days of Hollywood, where they would kind of smear the lens with a bit of Vaseline for the leading lady, and this is kind of like and also the backlight and glow, and there's like an unreal aura to some of the kind of actresses portrayed in those classic Hollywood films. Not that they do that with Zendaya here and they kind of go crazy or anything, but just like she's almost exclusively shot in slow motion in flowing robes, and her hair is down and this gorgeous curls flowing in the kind of the magic, the golden hour sun, like, well, it's just really well, and it fits within the context of Paul dreaming about this woman. And so there's just the visual look of her and everything is very enigmatic and comes across as such, and I think that leads in nicely to wanting to see more of her in the sequel, but also just to see like what her character is all about and how her and Paul are going to kind of interact with each other based on these visions and dreams that he's had. And there's Helen Mirren and Charlotte Rampling, like just everywhere you look, there's like a really great actor somewhere doing a bit part or whatever, and then the main cast is just like Josh Brolin was really like funny, and people said this film was humorless. People have said in their reviews, like, would it hurt if they had a few jokes? They have a few jokes. I don't want to like lose my voice here or anything, but fucking hell, the whole scene where they're spitting on the table, that was funny. And it was nicely placed in the context of the film. It's like there was a few moments of light humor. Oh, you've grown some muscles, have I? No. There was a couple of little jokes in there, and it didn't feel like it was overblown. It didn't feel like it was mandated to be in there. It didn't feel, I was going to say it didn't feel like it was one of those trailer moments where the music drops out and they play the joke, but I think they did that in the Dune trailer with the, you've grown some muscles, have I? No. I think they did that, but, it's and there's one other thing that felt kind of cliched, which was and this isn't really spoiling anything, but the last line of the film is, "This is just the beginning." And I heard someone say that I bet that the studio just asked for that because they didn't want the final line of the film to be desert power, which makes sense, I suppose. It was a cute little button, but perhaps for a film this good and a film this kind of, I don't want to say serious, but maybe this is just the beginning might not. It didn't really fit. The kind of, it felt cheesy in a film that is anything but cheesy. There's just so many great. Again, Josh Brolin was great. Rebecca Ferguson, phenomenal, as you would expect. She's a great actress. She's really, really great, and I've loved her in a lot of the Mission Impossible movies. She's phenomenal in Doctor Sleep, and she's great here. She's a phenomenal actress. Like, really brought a lot to this film. The sound design is just mental. It's so overpowering. Some of the vocal stuff on like the Harkonnen's planet and stuff is just like, I went to see Last Night in Soho, which is kind of like a horror thrillery kind of thing. Nothing in that film even unnerved me all that much. The some of the voices and kind of the deep stuff, and then like the different languages and kind of the vocalization in the score, when it was a dark piece of the score, was almost scary to me. It's this overpowering kind of like, it hits you in the gut and in the chest. And it was like, so, this film kind of, like made me feel like overwhelmed in terms of like the scale of this is incredible and it almost moves me. And then overwhelmed in like, oh, this is like really creepy. Like, this is really unsettling, and it was all through the sound. Well, not all through the sound. Obviously, the visual kind of ties in with it, a lot of dark and then black and, especially with like when you first see the Baron and it's just this kind of like misty shower and kind of just the paleness of him contrasted against the shadows and stuff. Brilliant stuff. Dave Bautista, who is in the film maybe for about 2 minutes, and you know, he's talking about how like, and I you know, I where do I go with this? I'll leave this in for free. I'm stammering all over the place, but part of me would have liked to just sit down and just review the film normally, but part and parcel of that is just like, again, the story of me seeing it and my experience with it and some of the things that I found interesting about things that have been said online. And Dave Bautista has been talking on Twitter and stuff and in interviews how, like, you know, yeah, the Marvel movies, I can stand there and make jokes and stuff, but I want to be doing stuff like Dune. I want like serious acting work. And someone on Twitter was like, motherfucker thinks he's like King Lear in Dune. He gets like about 2 scenes, and it's true. Like he's good, you know, but he doesn't have much to do. And you would think that in the second one, he'll get a bit more to sink his teeth into. But it was pretty funny. Motherfucker thinks he's King Lear, and it's like, yeah, but it wasn't really that big of a part, dude. You know. But I understand completely, and I do think actually, I laugh. He's in Blade Runner 2049, maybe a tiny bit more than in Dune. But he only has one scene, really, the opening sequence, and he almost steals the movie. I don't know, his acting in that one little scene was phenomenal. So, you know, I will hold my hands up, but he didn't get much to do in this one, you know. Timothée Chalamet, again, brilliant. And I'm trying to think if there's any other Jason Momoa was a lot of fun. I really liked his character, Duncan Idaho, and then people are ragging on that name on Twitter, of course, because it's Twitter, but yeah, he was a lot of fun, you know, as you would expect from him, but he felt like he fit in that world too. It didn't feel like you just plonked down Jason Momoa inside this world. It felt like his personality seeped into the character a little bit, but it kind of, you know, his look kind of worked, you know. And then we have Javier Bardem as the leader of the Fremen, and he, you know, and I did think watching the trailers, I thought he probably does. I feel like he doesn't have a very big role. You know, and he kind of doesn't, but he's very good in the short time that we see him in. And that spitting on the table sequence, someone kind of screen grabbed that again on Twitter. This is my life is film Twitter, and they just showed like a shot of Josh Brolin and then Javier Bardem, and it was just like No Country for Old Men. I was like, holy shit, I never made that connection. They both look so completely different than they did in No Country for Old Men, so I didn't make that connection, you know. Anyway, so many great things about this film. I could just waffle on and on about it. The little details, the big details, you know, and seeing it and with the sound, you know, because I'm a self-conscious movie watcher at home. You know, the volume never really goes north of 15 out of 100. You know, though I suspect that I mean, when you get to like 15, 20, it's really loud. You know, so I feel like if I went to like 100 on my TV and played Dune, it would probably just explode the TV. But you know, I don't like, you know, we have neighbors, and I don't like the idea of just fucking blaring movies. I mean, other neighbors aren't as considerate, but I don't like to be that guy, so I'm always like kind of hovering don't want to be too loud, you know. And you know, I could use headphones. Sometimes I do that when I'm watching a film in bed on the paltry 42-inch TV. I'll put headphones on and really, you know, zone into the film. But when I'm watching it with Connie, obviously we don't do that. We don't do headphones, so it's kind of like constantly keeping the volume down. So just to get into a cinema and just be like, fucking hit me with it, just you know, bring the house down. And it was just awesome. Like the bass, the power, you know, the Hans Zimmer score, which was like, in a way, very different than most of his other work. I felt a little bit of the influence of, when I say influence, it's stuff that he's done, but a little bit of the trickle down from Blade Runner 2049. I know it's like a little bit of synthesizers going on, but there's like, I don't know. And it's a film that's really punctuated by the music. I mean, there'll be like a scene of Paul looking out to like the kind of the sun, or the setting sun, I think it is. Maybe it's even, I don't think it's an eclipse. Maybe it is. But he's looking out into kind of the landscape, and it's like the beginning of him leaving to go to Arrakis, and it's this very pensive moment. But you could play that very quietly, but the score is like, and it's like really, you know, it's adding so much emphasis to quieter moments. And the film has quiet moments without the score, you know, but it's a film that very much lives and breathes by the power of the sound design and the music and the score. And everything else just holds up around it. I think it is a masterpiece. And one last kind of, I don't want to call them defenses, but I will speak up on this one because I watched Graham's review from Man v Film, and he talked about how for him it sounded like he loved everything about it, much like I did, but he said that it's just a 4 out of 5 from me because it's only half a movie, you know. And this gets weaponized in both forms. There are people who are saying, like, you know, well, you can't be too harsh on Dune because it's only half of a movie. Like, it's the first part. You can't really judge it unless you got the second part, you know. And I don't fully agree with that, you know. I think you look at some films, like maybe The Fellowship of the Ring. I love all three of them, but, you know, I mainly just watched The Fellowship of the Ring. I can comfortably end the story with, you know, I'm glad you're with me, Sam. And yeah, I'm fine with that. You know, I like the other two, but I can leave it there. And it is better than Two Towers and Return of the King in some ways. And there are, you know, things like the Alien franchise or the Terminator franchise where I just stop with the second film, you know, and I can maybe just for fun watch Alien 3 or Terminator 3 or whatever. But not that anyone would watch Alien 3 for fun, but you catch my drift. But, you know, it is interesting because this is very much one story that is cut in the middle. And there's been instances of that with YA adaptations like Breaking Dawn, Deathly Hallows, Mockingjay, you know, those series. And then there's the It movies, It Chapter 1, It Chapter... And I was kind of arguing with Graham that, like, It Chapter 1 kind of stands as its own movie. Maybe not the second one so much, but, you know... Because for him, he said that he wouldn't go back to, or doesn't feel like going back to the first It because he thought the second one was so bad. And that seems like a shame to me. But, you know, I do understand it, but I wouldn't rate the film any less than how great it really was. Because it just was that great, you know. And yeah, it doesn't have the strongest ending because it is a part one. And I do wonder if this would be something to set aside 5 hours for in the future. And do the whole thing as one movie. I don't know. Like when you're watching it at home and just do part 1, part 2. But, you know, people marathon these things. It's not unheard of that people will sit down and watch all 12, 13 hours of, I think it's about 11 or 12 hours of the Lord of the Rings extended editions. It's, you know, Dune's less than half of that. I'm assuming the sequel's going to be around the 2.5 hour mark. So anyway, so for me, the fact that it is just a part 1 doesn't really detract from it at all. Is there the possibility that part 2 won't live up to the first one? Yes. But I feel really safe in the hands of this team that Denny has created around himself, and obviously the producers he works with, because he just keeps hitting, and it's almost scary at this point. And there are directors out there who have really good track records, but he's really in this science fiction masterpiece stride right now, which is freakishly, you know, not even competent. It's beyond. It's like, it's a ridiculous level of creating great science fiction movies that I'm really enjoying and can't wait to see part 2. And hopefully it'll be, you know, it'll live up to the first part. I think that it will. And the fact that everyone involved seems so excited to be doing a second one, they really hope that a sequel would get greenlit, you know. I think that's promising, and how passionate Denny is about the film. I think he said something to the effect of, I made this film for one person, and that's me. Like, I made the movie I wanted to see, and that shines through because it just feels like a film that knows exactly what it wants to do, and it executes that. And for me, it provided an incredible cinema experience. And yeah, so I think that's pretty much it. Again, I know I could keep waffling, and I really did hope this would be about 20 minutes, but again, it is me. I understand these things, and you should understand them too. And if you've been listening this long, then I'm assuming you've enjoyed some of it, so thank you for tuning in and sticking it out. I seem to just be getting drawn into doing these long-form videos lately. I've done them before in the past, of course, but I don't know. I have a lot to say. I have a lot to ramble on about, and I probably missed a few things that I'll kick myself over when I turn the camera off, but overall, Dune... Again, it's difficult to use that term masterpiece because it gets thrown around too much. And I think maybe I think I threw it around a lot at a certain point in my life, but that was like a part of my life where I was just watching all this classic stuff. And they were masterpieces, you know. A lot of my movie watching life is in the past. And I can't really think of, you know, a film. There's not many films recently that I would call a masterpiece. There's films that I would say are brilliant and great, and there's just not that many. Even like The Last Jedi, which is my favorite film of all time, I don't think I would call that a masterpiece. It may be close to it. Not to not to ruffle anyone's feathers, but no, it's very rare that I would call a newer film that. But sometimes you just call a spade a spade. It's a pretty flawless film and just works so well on so many different levels, and I'm really excited to see it again. Maybe over Christmas I might watch it again, because it is on HBO Max, so I can kind of figure out some kind of geographical jiggery pokery, I don't know, figure something out and get access to HBO Max and watch Dune again at home, see how it holds up at home. It would be a shame without the IMAX sequences, because that was something where I was noticing the kind of the screen changing whenever it's a shot of the desert, woomph, pretty much. And I asked Connie afterwards, did you notice the aspect ratio changing? No. Well, I'm probably one of the only ones that it's just one of those things. But I really hope when we get that 4K Blu-ray that, one, it's a legit 4K transfer, but two, we get the IMAX sequences. And given the fact that Disney Plus have now stepped up and are going to release all the Marvel movies that had IMAX sequences on Disney Plus with the full IMAX, well, not full, but like the equivalent, IMAX enhanced, they call it, filling the whole 16:9 screen. Hopefully that's a step forward in the right direction for films that have IMAX sequences, and we'll see in the Blu-ray release of Dune, which Christopher Nolan was like way ahead of the curve on. He was releasing the IMAX scenes of his films like back in 2009 when the Dark Knight DVD came out, and then every Blu-ray of his films from Dark Knight onwards has the IMAX sequences. So the aspect ratio changes, which is a bit off-putting for some people. They like the cleaner, just the black bars on the top and the bottom, but and the one detractor sometimes, I'm going way off, I'm so sorry, I really apologize. The one detractor of having IMAX sequences on Blu-ray is that when it fills the screen, it looks fucking incredible, especially in a 4K disc. And then it goes back to the kind of the wider image. It's like, oh, it doesn't look as good, but you soon get used to it, and you just kind of look forward to the nice treats of the full frame kind of wonder of some of those IMAX sequences and shots. Anyway, I will leave it there. That has been Dune Part 1. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed. And I'll see you next time.
It's alright by me. Apart from the fact he throws cans of Carlin into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool. Yeah, he's really cool. But he's not quite as cool as you.